My dear one, something came to light during a quiet and unexpected moment. It was a conversation that was never meant to reach you this soon. The words were not planned, and they were never spoken with the intention of being discovered. Yet somehow, they are finding their way to you now. The person you love was sitting with someone they deeply trusted. It seemed like an ordinary moment from the outside, but beneath the surface, something unusual took place. Their voice changed. It became softer, slower, and more thoughtful. It was as if they were carrying something delicate inside their heart, something they had protected for a very long time. They did not begin by saying your name. Before your name entered the conversation, there was silence. A deep silence filled with emotions that were difficult to explain. Sometimes silence reveals more than words, because it shows that a person is searching for the courage to express something they have kept hidden. Do not overlook this moment, because what happened in that conversation was far from ordinary. Something shifted between them and the person listening. One simple question opened a door that had remained closed for a very long time. The atmosphere changed when the listener realized this was not just a casual conversation. There was something much deeper behind the way they spoke. Before your name was even mentioned, the emotion was already there. They lowered their eyes for a moment. It was not because they had nothing to say, it was because there was too much inside them, and they were trying to find the right way to explain it. The listener asked a simple question. Why do they keep coming back into your thoughts? For several moments there was no reply, but that silence carried a message of its own. The deepest emotions are often the hardest to explain. When something truly matters, people do not always have immediate words. Sometimes they need time, because they are facing feelings they have been trying to understand for a long time. Finally, they began to speak. Every word came slowly and carefully, as if they were afraid of revealing too much, yet unable to hide everything any longer. They admitted they could not completely explain it. But something about you continued to stay with them. Even while life moved forward, and even while other responsibilities demanded their attention, a part of their mind kept returning to you. Those words were not random. They were not spoken because of a passing emotion. They came after many private moments, countless memories, and many thoughts that had never been shared with anyone before. The person listening could tell that while they were speaking, they were remembering something much deeper. Their mind was not only focused on the conversation in front of them, it was traveling through memories connected to you. Maybe it was your voice that stayed with them. Maybe it was the kindness you showed them. Maybe it was a small detail about you that you never realized carried such meaning. Sometimes people leave a lasting impact without ever knowing it. A simple gesture, a quiet moment, or a single conversation can become unforgettable in another person's heart. The listener quietly asked if this was something serious. Once again, there was silence, but this time, the silence was different. It was not confusion, it was not uncertainty. It was the silence of someone who already knew the answer, but felt the truth was too powerful to say immediately. After a brief pause, they admitted something they had been trying to avoid. Every time they tried to let go of these feelings and move on with life, something inside them kept pulling them back again. That one confession changed everything. The conversation was no longer about a passing thought or a temporary emotion. It became clear that these feelings had survived distance, time, distractions, and even their own repeated attempts to move forward. They had tried to convince themselves that life would simply continue. They had tried to focus on other things. They had tried to place these emotions somewhere in the past. But some connections do not disappear simply because people decide not to think about them. The listener leaned in a little closer because they realized this was much deeper than they had first imagined. Then the person you love began explaining what made you different. Surprisingly, they did not focus on your appearance, your achievements, or anything visible from the outside. Instead, they spoke about something much deeper. They spoke about the feeling your presence leaves behind. They explained that even when you are not physically around, Thinking about you brings a kind of peace they cannot fully describe. Those words carried a powerful meaning. Peace is not something people mention without reason. When someone brings peace into another person's heart, it means their presence has reached a place much deeper than simple attraction or temporary interest. It means their memory has become connected to comfort, safety, and emotional calm. Your presence became something they carried within themselves, even during the moments when you were not there. The conversation continued, and the listener gently asked an important question. If these feelings are so strong, why have you never told them? This time the answer came more quickly. They explained that some emotions are not hidden because they are weak. Sometimes people remain silent because what they feel is too important to express without great care. They were not protecting emptiness. They were protecting something meaningful. They were afraid of handling something precious in the wrong way. They understood that once certain words are spoken, everything can change forever. Then came a sentence that revealed even more. They admitted that sometimes they wondered whether you truly understood how much you had changed the way they see life, love, and even themselves. Think about the meaning behind that. You may never have noticed the exact moment when your presence began affecting them. You may not have realized how deeply certain moments stayed in their memory. But somewhere inside them, something quietly changed. You became more than a memory. You became part of the way they think, part of the way they feel, and part of the way they understand their own heart. And the most important part of this conversation had still not been revealed. The listener smiled gently and asked one final question. What is it that you are truly afraid of? For the first time, their voice became almost a whisper. They admitted that what they felt had grown into something much bigger than they had ever expected. Those words came from someone who had spent a long time trying to understand their own emotions. They had searched for simple explanations, but their heart had created something that could not be easily explained. Something bigger than expected means something that quietly grew beyond the limits they once imagined. What started as a small feeling refused to remain small. Then your name was spoken once again. This time it carried a different kind of emotion. It was spoken with warmth and tenderness, as if even saying your name reminded them of everything they had tried so hard to hide. Sometimes, silence becomes the place where hidden emotions finally begin to reveal themselves. When there is no pressure, no one demanding answers, and no need to pretend, the truth inside a person often finds its own way to come forward. And that is exactly what happened during that quiet moment. Stay with this until the end, because what happened afterward revealed something much deeper than anyone expected. Without anyone asking another question, they suddenly began speaking again. Their voice changed slightly, becoming softer and more thoughtful. It was as if a feeling they had been holding back for a very long time had finally become too strong to keep hidden. They admitted that something strange kept happening to them. Even when they made a firm decision to stop thinking about that person, somehow their mind always found its way back. No matter how busy life became, and no matter how hard they tried to focus on other things, those thoughts continued returning. Those words were not rehearsed. They were not carefully prepared or selected. They came naturally, revealing feelings that had quietly lived inside their heart for far longer than anyone had realized. The words came out naturally, almost as though the heart had spoken before the mind could stop it. The person listening slowly turned all of their attention toward them. They realized this was no longer an ordinary conversation. Something much deeper was unfolding. It had become one of those rare moments when someone starts opening the hidden parts of themselves that they normally keep protected from everyone around them. Another pause followed, but this silence felt completely different. It carried more weight because once someone begins sharing a truth they have quietly held inside for a long time, there is usually much more waiting beneath the surface. One honest confession often leads to another. Once that emotional door begins to open, more feelings naturally find their way into the light. After sitting quietly for a few moments, they continued speaking. They explained that these thoughts did not only appear every now and then, they arrived during simple moments in the middle of everyday life, without any warning at all. And every time those emotions came back, they felt stronger than before. That small confession revealed something important. A simple idea can appear for a moment and then disappear. A random memory can come and go without leaving much behind. But when the same person keeps returning to someone's thoughts with even greater strength as time passes, it often means something much deeper is connected to that memory. It shows that the feeling never truly disappeared. A memory that is genuinely fading slowly loses its emotional weight. It becomes weaker over time. Eventually, it turns into something that belongs only to the past. But when a thought continues returning, when it grows stronger despite distance and passing time, it often reveals that something inside the person is still deeply connected to it. The emotional roots reach much further than they first imagined. Stay until the very end, because the next thing they shared completely changed the meaning of the conversation. The listener gently asked, "What happened whenever those thoughts came back? Did the memory appear first? Did the feeling come first? Or was there always some unanswered question connected to it?" For a brief moment, complete silence filled the space between them. They seemed to search carefully for the right answer. Not because they did not know what it was, but because the answer carried more honesty than they had expected to reveal. Finally, they spoke softly. It was the feeling. Those few simple words carried powerful meaning. Memories can return without warning. A familiar song, a place, or even an ordinary moment can suddenly bring someone back into your thoughts. But emotions are different. Feelings usually return because something much deeper is still connected. They rise from a place inside that still recognizes an unfinished story. A story that may have become quiet. A story that may have been pushed aside. But never a story that completely disappeared. This time they did not immediately say the person's name. Instead, they lowered their eyes for a moment. A small smile slowly appeared across their face before they even noticed it themselves. Then, speaking more softly than before, they explained something that had always been difficult to put into words. Some people simply find a permanent place inside your mind without ever asking for it. Those words remained hanging quietly between them because everyone understands what an ordinary memory feels like. Normal memories come and go. They appear for a brief moment before fading as life moves forward. But this was different. This was something that arrived naturally. It never needed an invitation. It stayed even while they were honestly trying to move on with life. Stay until the end, because another moment is still coming that reveals even more than this. The listener continued with kindness. They asked what happened whenever someone else mentioned that person's name. This time, there was no effort to hide the truth. They admitted that whenever someone spoke that person's name, everything else around them seemed to grow quieter for a moment. The world around them slowly faded into the background, while their attention naturally shifted toward that one person. That confession revealed far more than they probably intended. Because when someone's focus immediately moves toward one particular person, it often shows exactly where their emotions have already settled. Then another quiet confession followed. They spoke carefully, almost as though they suddenly realized they were revealing far more than they had planned. They admitted they had started noticing small details they never imagined they would notice. The listener looked at them with quiet curiosity and gently asked what kind of details they meant. After taking a slow, deep breath, they explained. It was the little things. The way that person spoke, certain words they often used, small habits, tiny facial expressions. The little things that most people would never even notice. Yet somehow those details had become impossible for them to ignore. And that answer uncovered something very important. Attention naturally follows what matters most. People rarely remember the smallest details about someone unless that person has quietly become deeply meaningful to them. The things we notice often reveal what our hearts value the most. Stay until the end, because the most revealing truth had not yet been spoken. The listener gently pointed something out. They said it sounded as though this was something the person had been thinking about far more than they wanted to admit. For the first time, there was no disagreement. There was no attempt to change the topic. There was no effort to pretend it was not true. Instead, they quietly accepted it. Maybe they had been thinking about it much more than anyone had ever realized. Those words stayed resting quietly between them, because private thoughts often reveal much more than public conversations ever can. What people openly say is usually only a small part of what they truly carry inside their hearts. Then another sentence slipped out, almost like a private thought they had been keeping only for themselves. They quietly wondered whether the other person could somehow feel all of this, even though they had never openly expressed it. That question carried much deeper meaning. People rarely wonder if someone can sense their emotions unless those feelings have grown so strong that hiding them no longer feels possible. When emotions continue growing quietly inside, people begin asking questions they never expected to ask. They begin wondering if the other person somehow already knows. They wonder whether the connection exists on both sides, whether the silence between them is carrying something much greater than spoken words. Stay until the very end, because the next question changed everything. The listener asked one final question before the conversation completely changed direction. If that person was standing right here beside you and heard everything you have shared today, what would be the hardest truth for you to admit? This time, the silence lasted even longer than before. It was not an empty silence. It was the kind of silence where someone quietly searches through every hidden part of themselves, looking for words strong enough to explain what they truly feel. Finally, after sitting with the question for quite some time, they answered honestly. The hardest truth would be admitting that they had been acting as though everything was completely normal, while quietly carrying emotions that had become much bigger than they ever expected. That single sentence quietly explained so much. Sometimes people pretend everything is perfectly fine because they are afraid of what might happen if they admit that something inside them has completely changed. They continue living their daily lives. They smile. They keep themselves busy. They go through familiar routines. They act as though nothing is different. But deep inside, something has already shifted in a way they cannot ignore. And when someone admits they are carrying more than they ever imagined possible, it means those feelings have quietly grown beyond every limit they once believed existed. Before leaving, they shared one final thought. At first, it sounded like just another simple sentence. But what happened afterward gave those words an entirely new meaning. The conversation should have ended at that moment. It should have remained nothing more than a private exchange between two people. But sometimes, the most ordinary conversations quietly become the ones that change everything forever. If you'd like, I can continue rewriting the remaining part in the same style while keeping the total script above 9,000 characters.